Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Learn to Love podcast, your guide to everything love, sex, intimacy, and relationships. Each week, your host, Zach Beach, interviews new experts on love, including couples therapists, relationship coaches, sex educators, and best-selling authors. Learn the best tips and cutting-edge wisdom to better love yourself, others, and the world. Thanks so much for joining us. We hope you enjoy the show.
Hello, beautiful souls. I'm so positively delighted that you could join us on the Learn to Love podcast. I am your host, Zach Beach, and for today's episode, we have the spiritual teacher, author, retired psychotherapist, and retired adjunct professor of psychology, John J. Prendergast. I've been connected with Dr. Prendergast for a long time. We originally connected when I was a student and he was a professor at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco, when I remember being deeply inspired by his grounded presence, loving awareness that was infused with a deep wisdom that came from a lifetime of experience in the world of psychotherapy and human potential. So when I started Learn to Love as a workshop series, he was one of the first speakers that I invited to facilitate the monthly workshop. When COVID happened, I transitioned Learn to Love into this very podcast. And of course, he is one of the first guests that I invited to have on the show for episode 7 on the deep heart. So I was so happy to learn about his newest book, Your Deepest Ground, which invites readers to take a deep dive into their personal, archetypal, and universal ground, and to see through the false ground of their early conditioning and limited identity. It was such a wonderful conversation to have with John, to connect with him again in what he describes as potentially his final book. On this journey of love, on this journey of opening the heart, we can tune into our deepest ground to create a solid foundation to maintain that open heart from an embodied sense of safety and security. So without further ado, let's begin. Hello, John. Welcome back to the Learn to Love podcast. How are you today?
Well, thank you, Zach. Yeah, good to be back. It's been a few years.
Yes, it's such a joy to reconnect. It's such a joy to have you back on. I really appreciated you coming on for episode 7 when I was just a little fledgling podcast. And now 150 episodes later and a few circles around the sun, it's wonderful to have you back on the show. Episode 7 was on the deep heart, and we are here today to talk about our deepest ground. And you write in your intro that you say this book will certainly be your last, which I certainly hope not, but is this your...
Did I say certainly or almost certainly? I think I left a smidgen of a crack there.
Okay.
But it feels that way. It's very interesting. This whole business of writing these last 3 books, In Touch and The Deep Heart, and now this one, Your Deepest Ground, they feel like an upwelling. And I'm just kind of listening and following, and I don't have the feel of anything else coming as I did in the past. So that's why I wrote that. But I'm willing to be surprised.
Okay. Let's talk about this journey from the heart to the ground. What made you want to bring this message to the world?
Well, it really came out of my own experience. I've been at this kind of spiritual investigation for many decades, and studied with John Klein and then Adyashanti. And I was on a retreat with Adyashanti in 2003 and then 2005, in which there was a really significant opening of the heart. The first part was a recognition of what I would call innate or intrinsic wholeness or completeness within myself and, by extension, everyone else. And that was quite a profound, intuitive recognition, realization, just kind of the infinite depths of loving awareness. Followed 2 years later, in 2005, by the recognition, like everything, the so-called world, is an expression of that there really is no separate perceiver and perceived. That, to me, felt like, wow, that's kind of the culmination of the spiritual quest and understanding. But I had heard Ajay give a talk in that period, 2004 or 5, when he talked about the existential grip in the guts, and a light went off. It's like I realized there's more to go. Keep going. There's like a deeper root to the sense of separation. And so really since then, almost over the last 20 years, there's been a very gradual descent, I would say, of awareness into this very dense area of conditioning, which is into the belly, into the pelvic bowl, into the legs, into the feet. Basically our very densely conditioned aspect of self. So many spiritual traditions are about awakening mind and heart, and far fewer about awakening the gut, or more specifically, the ground. And why the ground? Like, this is the specific part of the belly or the hara where there's the greatest contraction and resistance to letting go. And I have found this was true in my own experience, Zach, and in my experience with many, many people that I've worked with in my mentoring one-on-one practice and in my retreats and group practice, because it's so deeply entrenched and unconscious. There is a profound visceral fear of letting go, losing control, and losing ourself, and facing what to the ordinary mind feels like annihilation. So in my experience, this has not been well described, articulated. We don't have much guidance on how to navigate this very dense area. And so that was the movement to write this book, is to actually share what I've discovered in terms of my own process and in my work with many other people.
It's interesting to hear that you almost had this very profound awakening or discovery of the heart, of the wholeness inside of you, and therefore is inside everyone else at what looks like about 20 years ago. And it sounds, first of all, the way you speak to it feels like it was a very profound experience that has definitely stuck with you. But I'm almost getting the sense that wasn't enough.
It was it's enough in itself, but it wasn't stabilized. I think that's the significant difference. Like, there was the essential understanding of non-separation, of loving awareness as our foundational nature, but there was a deeper level yet that had not been imbued with this understanding. And because of that, this understanding, heartfelt knowing and wisdom, had not stabilized. And particularly, I think, in relationship, where threats of abandonment or engulfment, loss of control, continued to get, activated and stimulated. And so it was clear, it wasn't the mind saying, it's not enough. It was more the recognition, keep going. This exploration can continue to deepen, to go all the way through the body, right? Don't stop halfway. Don't stop just with the mind and the heart. Keep going. Keep going. And that's an unusual message to get, because normally, like, you get to that opening of the heart and it's like, that's it. What else could there be? But it's like that flowering of the heart, like a lotus flower, needs to be rooted, deeply grounded in the mud. It's a beautiful image, and one that's very evocative for me. So as this descent, we could call a waking down or descent of awareness, happens, as we are aware that it can happen and we allow it to happen, there's a sense of of settling down even more deeply, even more intimately and profoundly into the body, settling, inhabiting the body, going all the way through the body, actually. So the body is no longer kind of a dense, contracted object, but reveals itself in subtler and subtler forms as an expression of openness. So it's complementary. I find these themes of the heart and the ground are so profound. You've been exploring the heart, now for many years, and all the various levels and facets of it. And for me, this is a very profound and relevant and complementary investigation. Like, how can the ground support the flowering of the heart? Because if it's shaky, if it's unconscious, it will continually sabotage that openness of the loving wisdom. What does that touch for you when I say that?
Well, the inquiry, that's such a lovely inquiry. How can the ground support the flowering of the heart? And yeah, when you do talk about this traveling downward, what you call a dense area of conditioning around the belly and pelvis, I am very tempted to go to other energetic systems or concepts. Like, I'm like, is this the solar plexus down to the sacral, down to the root chakra? Is this a reference to the Chinese Dantian?
Yes, it does.
Well, there you go. That was my next question. How do you think of this?
Yeah. What we discover in this exploration of the human experience and the depths of our being is that the body is much more than we ordinarily think and sense it to be. And as we stay close to the body, as for instance to the heart center, which may feel numb, when we go beneath the numbness, we discover this exquisite sensitivity and openness and capacity for compassion and love and radiant luminosity. And similarly too, as attention drops further down into the body, it opens up. And there are knots, areas of constriction. One is in the solar plexus, in the Indian subtle body tradition, the third chakra. This is around kind of trying to control ourselves and others and interpersonal power dynamics. And often we're trying to, control anger or feelings or dynamics in relationship. But control is a very key, this is an area of control. And so the area of the solar plexus and the base of the spine, there's this very strong connection between trying to be in control of ourselves, others, the environment, and trying to be safe in order to be safe. So human systems, biological systems organize around safety. That's a primary need. And once that need is met, then, there's a flowering of higher capacities, and particularly the flowering of love. But if that sense of safety is not there, the flowering of the heart will be in some way affected, and either greatly or subtly. So this is difficult material to face and be with. There's a lot of trauma, and early attachment, wounding, and not to mention ways that we take ourselves existentially as separate selves, all of which create a kind of contraction, a core contraction. And so a lot of my investigation is into actually what is the nature of this contraction? Can we let ourselves feel it? Can we sense into it? Can we inquire into any beliefs that are related to it? And the more that we approach this from a sense of openness and presence, the more it has a chance to unwind itself. So this has been fascinating and very rich and profound exploration.
Yeah, I do like thinking of the spiritual journey as one of going from the head to the heart. And I also like your encouragement to keep going. Because there is a lovely line from a Wendell Berry poem that says the true spiritual journey is 1 inch where we finally arrive at the ground beneath our feet and learn to be at home.
Nice.
And what you're talking about, that sense of safety, that sense of attachment, that sense of security is also something that we maybe hopefully got when we were growing up.
But often don't.
Right.
Or we have some degree of it. And we're not even aware of how compelling that conditioning is and how it affects our relationships, our work, our sense of self-care. So it is about connecting with the body. It is about connecting with the earth. But there are deeper dimensions of the ground, which is very interesting. That is to say, there are archetypal dimensions. Carl Jung, for example, was a pioneer in exploring and experiencing. And then deeper than that, just this pure, formless, empty, open awareness, sometimes called the groundless ground. So in my book, I talk about all those dimensions, the psychological dimension and resistance, much of it from early childhood conditioning or trauma, and how to work with that in a effective way. Archetypal dimensions, and then that deepest dimension that is kind of opening to the ground of being, the ground where we use a lot of metaphor and paradoxical language.
So I wouldn't mind reading the very first sentence of your book, which goes, "We all have a subtle yet profound pull to live more from our hearts, our center of love, compassion, gratitude, freedom, and silent wisdom, and less from our heads, the primary source of our critical judgments and core limiting beliefs." Because it brings to mind, for me, this basic idea that everyone's living from the shoulders up. Well, not everyone, many people.
Many people.
And
Most
many
people
are very content in this place. Like, even if you were to say, oh, this is your conditioning, like, you were told to be in your mind instead of your heart and body. But I think many people are like, no, I like being here. Isn't this what it means to be human? Like, we have this intelligence, this intellectual capacity. Isn't this where consciousness rises? And then it's like, okay, there is some encouragement or even some resistance or obstacles of it that might need to be removed in order to begin this journey and to start this journey. But do you feel that people do have this yearning to live from the heart, this yearning to come to the ground?
I think so, although, you make a good point. Most people may not be aware of it, and certainly, not in touch with it, and may not even live in accordance with that. What comes to me, Zach, is I remember seeing a few years after 9/11, there was a dramatized movie of firemen who were trapped, as they were trying to, in the building, and it looked like they weren't going to be rescued. And there was a dialogue between them. And these were like just very ordinary working class men. And they were talking about life and like, well, if this is the end of life, how do you think you've lived your life? And one of them said to the other, the real question in my mind is, have I loved well? Have I loved well? This is really how I measure the value of my life. And I was very struck by that line. And I think on some deep level, that is the question that we do carry as human beings. Have we loved well? Have I lived in accordance with my deepest truth and knowing, with my heart wisdom? But of course, as we know, we take many detours and go down many blind alleys to kind of exhaust other alternatives until we get clear about actually what is most important. And so that question of what is the most important thing is a very profound one to sit with and to listen. And that really invites us to go beneath the surface of ordinary mind and to actually attune with our deeper nature.
That's the best measure, of a well-lived life, is if we have loved well. So I hear you. I hear that we have this desire to live from the heart. And I hear that unless there is a ground to support it, it might not be fully nourished, if we were to continue the metaphor of the fertile earth. And I'm also hearing from you the challenges around it. And I'm noticing you're often using this word of like tightness, density, holding patterns,
contraction, grip,
contractions. And you also said how hard it is to let go. So tell us more about that.
Well, this is a very, very basic survival strategy around which almost all of us organize our lives. And if we're honest and begin to actually examine our functioning, our thinking, we can just see how much of our, strategic mind is oriented one way or another to trying to be in control and trying to be safe and secure. However, and so the result of all of this, I think just natural developmental steps as well as our conditioning, is to develop a kind of contracted sense of self. And here, I'm kind of forming my hand in a grip unknowingly. And we organize ourselves around that contraction and think that's who we are. And even if it's uncomfortable, even if we're stuck in our heads, there's something familiar about it. And we equate familiarity with safety, but it's actually not true. We're staying within a box, within a rigid system, and that makes us maladaptive, and not to mention just not open to the fullness of life. And so for some of us, there's just like a deep pull to start investigating and to start questioning who we've taken ourselves to be. Like, is it true that I am this kind of limited being and all this tension and somatic contraction? Is this really what I am? And what if that's not true? What is my deepest knowing about that? That's a question that I use very often. What is the truth now? What is my deepest knowing about this belief? How I hold myself as a limited being, as flawed, as lacking in some way. And it's very interesting. It's a kind of art, this meditative inquiry, to attune with this deeper knowing and then open to it. And what I find, the interesting thing about release of contraction is it happens spontaneously when there is a seeing through of what's not true. When illusion is seen through, there is natural release. We don't have to willfully, and in fact, we can't willfully release on this level. But what we can do is investigate in an authentic and vulnerable and self-honest way, who we've taken ourselves to be on various levels, and to embrace that, and to question the beliefs that are associated with that. So this principle that seeing through falsehood, illusion, and untruth spontaneously allows natural release has been a very important one, I found, both in my own experience and my work with others. And so what happens is the contraction begins to relax. It's kind of like a melting. And I'm sure you've experienced this, and many of your listeners. Like when we get in touch with the deeper truth, there's a kind of quality of relaxing, melting, opening, enlivening. In terms of the heart center, we feel more radiance, we feel more warmth, we feel essential qualities of being, love, kindness, compassion. These just start to naturally radiate out. We can certainly cultivate them, and there's value in doing that. But if we kind of question these long-standing contractions and constructions, what happens is there's just a natural flowering. So we provide an optimal environment, not trying to change ourselves, but to become more intimate and to question these core limiting beliefs. And there is a natural opening process, and the contraction releases, and we find ourselves more as openness itself. We open to our openness.
I love what you said. A release of contraction happens spontaneously when there is a seeing through of what is not true. And I can't help but think later today, I'm going to actually teach a yoga class called Flow and Restore. And it's so in line with everything I theme around this class. It's a restorative class. So it's all about getting physical support to the body, blankets, bolsters, creating a sense of safety that allows somebody to relax.
Exactly. Yeah. Same principle. Exactly the same principle. It's a relaxation.
Think of this quote. I've heard of it from Chogyam Trungpa, that he describes ourselves as a bundle of tense muscles defending our existence.
Exactly. That's the core contraction. So it's really, I have to say it takes some courage to kind of investigate this deeply, because strange as it seems, we get very attached to this bundle of tension that Trungpa described. We think that's our ground. We think that's our center. And we think, and feel, without that, I'm no one, I'm nothing. And that's it. To the ordinary mind, that looks and feels like death. And so there's an aversion to that. It's like, I don't want to go near that to risk potential annihilation, to risk being nothing. The curious thing is, we are no thing. We're not a thing, we're not that, Much truer, much deeper is we are this open awareness, which we can't quantify, which we can't put in a box. And in the discovery of that really frees our humanity to be expressed in a much more spontaneous and creative way.
Well, I feel like I have to ask, what about the perspective that there is no ground when you say there is no thing?
I agree. That's why groundless ground is, probably my favorite description. There is no ground, and coming back to Trungpa, he said, the bad news is there's no parachute. The good news is there's no ground. So, it can feel like a free fall, and then you kind of relax into it, and then you realize there's no conventional, there's no localized ground, and that's fine. I don't need it. In fact, I've never needed it. So you're right, no ground. So ground is a metaphor, right? And it's at its deepest level, the metaphor dissolves, and that's appropriate.
So it's the raft that we discard when we get to the other side?
Same. Yeah. In this case, instead of that's kind of a horizontal metaphor. You're crossing the river with a raft, you discard the raft. In this case, which is, completely appropriate in terms of a movement through time, this is more of a vertical drop. It's like we let go of what I call our false ground, what we stood on, which we took to be real and solid and substantial, and we discover it's not. And we relax into that letting go. And what happens is we find a profound stability. quite unexpectedly, a sense that all is well no matter what. And that really supports, that could sound like a passive discovery. It's like, oh, well, why do anything if everything's okay? But it's not that. It's more like it just gives a profound sense of peace and stability from which we can then respond in a creative rather than a reactive way. Though we still care about the world and care about relationships and care about people, but we're not triggered, in the way that we maybe once were by our old, survival fears.
That is a lovely concept I found in your book, this idea of the false versus the true ground. So I wouldn't mind hearing more about that. What is the false ground that people tend to rely on? And what is the true?
Yeah, false ground is a bundle of, I would say, core limiting beliefs, reactive emotions, and somatic contractions. It has those three elements, cognitive, emotional, and somatic. And it feels like a grip in the core of the body on an energetic and even somatic level. Often we're not aware of it until we relax sufficiently to realize, oh, here's this kind of core tension I wasn't even aware of. So in that sense, it's kind of the floor of our conventional experience. If we're using the metaphor of a house, we could say that the head is more like the roof, and when there's an awakening of the mind and from the mind, it feels like the roof comes off and there's a lot of open, spacious awareness and, certainly an easy mindfulness, an ability to watch the mind and not be, fixated on it. It's like when the heart opens, the walls come off. It's just like the sense of separation, inside, outside, gradually attenuates and can, at times completely open. And we just realize a natural communion and oneness. So the floor is this, level, more core contraction, unconscious core contraction that we've stood upon unknowingly and took to be real, and discover that it's actually another construct, like the roof, like the walls, and that we actually don't need to live in a box. We can live. It's disorienting, no doubt, because we do take ourselves as a separate self, and we do identify with our self constructs. So this is a profound deconstructive process of the mind, of the heart, of the hara, and it's, no doubt about it. There are periods that can be very disorienting because the body mind's used to taking itself as a contracted object, and rather than discovering its natural open nature. So there's an acclimation process too, as the ground begins to give way, as our false ground begins to give way, and we discover a hidden depth, a sense of underground space. It can take a while to orient. I mean, it's been a gradual process for me. I remember I was not long after I'd done my last retreat with Adya, I was driving down Highway 101 from Petaluma to visit a friend in San Rafael, and driving along, and suddenly it felt like the bottom fell out. It's just like there was no ground at all. And I wasn't sure I could drive the car. I mean, I seriously considered pulling over and just like, can I manage? And so, don't drive heavy machinery, don't operate heavy machinery while the ground is collapsing. I was able to drive, but it was unnerving actually when it first happened. But that was the only dramatic time. Otherwise, it's been a very kind of gradual release. And what I noticed, Zach, is often there's a release and then a recontraction. And this is, I think many people have noticed that with the heart as well. Heart opens, heart closes. But when it closes, it's not quite as closed. So there's a shift there's a kind of default mode we know that we have in terms of our conventional sense of self that localizes in the brain. Similarly, we clench ourselves. And as that clench releases, very often there's a reconfiguration of it, but in a less constricted form. So it's a gradual process, I find, of the false ground giving way to, let's call it, the groundless ground.
Yeah, I love the imagery of the house, that the mind opening is taking the roof off and you get to see the stars, and the heart opening is taking the walls off, which connects you to the nature and people and world around you. And then the next step is the floor. And It's funny because the other day I had a friend who we've both been in California for quite some time. And they describe spiritual communities in California being too airy-fairy, which is an interesting word. And that's a common criticism for those. Particularly, I feel like it might be more in like the spiritual but not religious crowd, like without the groundedness perhaps of a lineage or tradition. It's all about the vibes and can get mushy and too woo. And I am curious if you see this groundedness as a way of making sure our spiritual life doesn't get too pie in the sky.
Well, the way I kind of think about this, and there is that tendency, and you see it a lot in transpersonal fields and kind of interest in sort of psychic phenomena and states. And, there's a lot, very often a kind of attachment to passing experiences and a lack of real rigorous clarity in terms of noticing fine points of one's experience. But above all, there is, I think, a legitimate criticism of much of spirituality as being evasive, escapist, just you can't deal with the grittiness of human experience, the suffering, the difficulty, the poignancy of ordinary human life. And people turn to spirituality as a way to soothe themselves and also to, in some way, deny the difficulty of the experience. So that definitely happens. And you'll see in some traditions, particularly monastic traditions that have either Western or Eastern, renunciate traditions, where there's an accent on formless awareness, on transcendence. It's like, no, you're not the body. You're infinite, spacious awareness. So don't get caught in that illusion. Well, the difficulty with that is it's very much of an up and out approach and a transcendental approach. And actually, that was the approach that I was most familiar with in my 20s. That was some years ago. And it really felt like I was trying to lift up, to a higher dimension. And that's actually unsustainable. And it doesn't work well in relationships, and it doesn't work well in ordinary life, not for long. If you're on a retreat, if you're in a spiritual community, isolated from others, you can work for a while. But you always come back to our humanity, our relationships, to the body, to this very earthy and challenging human experience. So for me, I've also, worked as a therapist for many years, now retired. And I also worked as an adjunct professor of psychology at the California Institute of Integral Studies, where I trained and supervised master's level counseling students for over 2 decades. So for me, it's been very important to integrate this understanding of true nature with our psychological conditioned nature. And so accenting the heart and accenting the ground have felt like very important corrective medicines for this tendency of some, and perhaps the majority of spiritual traditions, to be overly transcendent. And, that's true for even the spiritual, not religious crowd who maybe are not in a tradition. And they're just kind of engaged in more psychic level material. And, there's a reality to that, some reality to it, but one has to go deeper, actually, because this is not about achieving states or having particular experiences. It's really about a profound attunement and recognition with who we are fundamentally.
I like how you use the term integrate. That's coming up for me. We are integrating our understanding of our true infinite nature as loving awareness.
Integrating, and I would say even a better word is to embody in a very profound way, so that it's lived as our ordinary experience. I think that's really what, that would be the optimal realization, is that this in a way becomes our common sense experience. And in a way, it becomes ordinary, nothing extraordinary. It becomes very simple, very firsthand. It's like, I know we are made of the same awareness. We share the same heart of awareness. We share the same ground of being. And I don't even need to think about it. It's just deeply felt and known.
I like that you brought up the idea of embodiment, because I wouldn't mind getting to practical application of these ideas. I feel like so far we've been talking about it rather metaphorically or abstractly, depending on how you take it. So I love all these ideas. And okay, I finished this podcast and now I want to implement this idea of traveling down to the ground. What does that look like?
It begins with self-honesty and vulnerability. I think these are the most important values and assets in this exploration, coupled with the love of truth. And so it really is about being rigorously self-honest, not critical, but just like, what is my experience? What is my actual lived experience? How am I thinking? How am I feeling? How am I acting? And getting closer to that, it's like getting real with ourselves. That really feels to me like, do I really want to be here? Do I really want to fully enter into my life? Am I willing to feel anything, see anything, know anything, to enter more fully into my life? So those are kind of, for me, core principles. The particular practices will vary according to the individual. I mean, I have, you've looked at my book, I have a set of methods, so to speak, that work well for me, but I know there are many, many, methods for inquiring more deeply and becoming more intimate with our experience. And that will depend on the person, what you're drawn to, what you resonate with as a practice, as a tradition. So that's highly variable. In terms of specifically the ground, it means bringing attention to the lower half of our body. And it can help actually to bring, if we have a meditation practice, to start with a sense of breathing in beneath the navel, the lower belly, the hara. This is the lower dantian. And that's a way of beginning to anchor attention in the lower half of the body. So just by bringing attention to the lower half of our body, we're signaling interest, and very interestingly, it's like that part of the body begins to respond. It's like when we pay attention to anything, it's like a call and response. So it's like, okay, I'm going to start listening. I'm going to start sensing. We notice how ungrounded we are. We notice part of this self-honesty. We notice when we become fearful. We notice how that feels in the body. We begin to notice what we're telling ourselves, what our core limiting beliefs may be around safety, around resilience, about resource. Like, I can't deal with it. It's too much. I don't have the support. I'm not. And then we begin to question those beliefs from our deepest knowing. So that's kind of, that willingness to feel, the willingness to sense without trying to change it, breathing into it, letting ourselves feel. If we feel shaky, letting ourselves shake rather than trying to resist that, and questioning our beliefs from our deepest knowing. And that just creates more and more intimacy with this zone and domain of experience. So it's not abstract at all. It's very much something we can either, as a sitting practice, we can begin to attune with our attention and our breath. And in our regular life, begin to pay attention to when we feel ungrounded, to when we tell ourselves stories that unground ourselves.
I love those values you mentioned at the very beginning. Self-honesty, vulnerability, coupled with a love of truth. And I'm curious for you how this shows up in the psychotherapist's office, simply because denial, avoidance, repression, to me, are all key ways that people do avoid the necessary work that needs to be done. And it's coming up for me. It's been coming up for me a little bit, and this might be getting too specific into things. But as you know, I've begun my own journey as a therapist, and I've had a couple clients with basically what in the DSM would say alcohol use disorder. And you see the principles we're describing to me in two main ways. One is even the most intense alcoholics will deny that it's a problem, will deny that they're addicted, will deny. They might say, yeah, I get in bar fights and have been arrested and drive occasionally, and my spouse is threatening to divorce me, but it's not a problem. But then I also am just thinking overall as a society, our embrace of alcohol as like the one psychoactive drug we're all allowed to buy freely And the fact that this is a depressant that depresses our nervous system and it depresses our ability to feel. And many people thus use it as an escape.
To numb. That's right.
Yeah, to numb. So in your work, as a psychotherapist,
Now retired, by the way, but go ahead.
Yeah, retired, but experienced.
I continue to work with people, but not as a therapist, but as a mentoring. So this material comes up. Now, in terms of working with denial, it's kind of I don't actually work with people who are struggling with addiction or alcohol use disorder. I have in the past a little bit, but it's not been a specialty of mine, and I'm not particularly well trained in that. And so I don't draw people. I haven't drawn very many people for whom that's been a problem. But denial in general and repression is very common. And it localizes very often as tension in the body. And for unknown reasons, I have a kind of unusual sensitivity when I sit with people. I can kind of feel where areas of contraction are. It's not 100% accurate, but it's pretty accurate. And so if I sense that with someone, I'll say, I'm just wondering if anything going on here, touch the heart, touch the solar plexus, touch the belly, touch the throat. I said, I'm feeling some tension. Maybe it's mine. I don't know, but anything happening there for you? And this way, inviting attention and like, can we be curious about this? Would you be open to exploring what this, tension? So I work through the body. I work somatically rather than, asking, more cognitive questions about it. And then so there's a more like a shared investigation of experience in the moment in terms of sensing. Now, some people, of course, are really out of touch with their bodies.
All right, that's exactly what I was going to say. A lot of people like, I don't feel anything.
Like you said, they live, the truth is I don't work with many people like that anymore, just because they're not drawn to, my way of working and what I'm interested in. But again, I may work cognitively then. I may work with their belief systems around control and what they fear about losing control and what they imagine would happen. But mostly I do work more in that kind of subtle, somatic, energetic, and emotional way. And the people I work with are on board with it because that's actually what they want. They want to be more intimate with themselves.
I know you're not a psychotherapist anymore. However, even just speaking with you, I am very much enjoying your grounded presence, as I would say. Like, I'm thinking about all the ways, ground comes up with in our life, such as the fertile ground for our growth. But even right now, speaking with you, I myself am feeling my own sense of safety rise and stress begin to lower. And I feel like that's also a key role that the therapist can step into, is potentially being a ground for somebody else to discover theirs.
Absolutely. I mean, we know the principle of co-regulation. It's a very important one for listeners who are unfamiliar with it. It's like when a client comes in or a patient comes into the therapist, often they're in a very kind of activated state. And the therapist usually, not always, is in a calmer, more regulated state. And so there is an attunement process that goes on between client and therapist, where in a way, the client borrows the nervous system of the more regulated person and begins to self-regulate by that kind of attunement. And this happens between infants and their mothers. We know that there's an entrainment of heartbeat and breath, and that this co-regulative function is very important in terms of a child's ability to self-regulate. So a similar process actually goes on in the therapeutic exchange. There are deeper levels of this co-regulation happening and deeper levels of attunement. Daniel Siegel talks about this, interpersonal neurobiology, and it's brilliant and spot on work about how relational we are and how important attunement is. So there's also, you're describing, Zach, kind of a sense of maybe feeling more safe and relaxed in some subtle way in our conversation. That's a very, very common experience, I find, sitting with people. Like they feel, oh, he's not judging me. He's not trying to change me. He's at ease in himself, he or she, doesn't matter. And there's just a natural kind of, oh, I can relax too. I don't need to prove anything. I don't need to change. I can just be, I can relax. I can just be more at ease in myself. And so this kind of co-regulatory function is quite interesting, and it goes very deeply. And it also exposes areas where, oh, I can't let go, because I have a story about what if I might lose control, and then how would I appear and what would happen? And that's an area to explore, because it's based almost always on experience when we're children, where we felt unsafe to simply be as we are. And we discover, oh, that's actually not true anymore. Tears can come, no problem. Laughter can come, shaking can come. It's not unusual in this process when I work with people and we explore in this way that a kind of trembling happens, a subtle trembling, a kind of subtle shaking, and people get surprised by it. But I normalize it. I just say this is actually part of a natural release process, and it will pass, and just, allow it to happen. You can trust this. And it's like, oh, I can trust this. It's okay. And then there can be some shaking, there can be some tears. And then a minute later, it's like, wow, I feel so calm. I feel so grounded. I feel so present in a way I never have before. And that's some part of that core contraction is released, at least temporarily. So that's all part of that. It's in the field, right? And that's why it's so important. I mean, some of this work we do on ourselves, and other work we need to do in relationship. And it could be therapeutic relationship. It could be a coach. It could be a spiritual mentor, depending on what our needs and interests are.
That's exactly where my mind was going when I was hearing this idea that when we are in the presence of someone who is not judging us, who is not trying to change us, it allows us to relax. And that allows vulnerability, intimacy, closeness, connection to happen. So the time has absolutely flown by, John. I only have time for a few more questions, and we might not have enough time for this one, but you've been on this earth for a while. Many people say our modern times are unprecedented. I think many people feel a sense of ungroundedness in the uncertainty. Or maybe you wake up in the morning feeling quite grounded, and then you check the news and suddenly there's...
It's very unsettling. Yes.
Yes, unsettling and destabilizing.
Mm-hmm.
So any general advice for the person feeling particularly ungrounded, uncertain, unsafe in today's times?
The first response is for me to say, I understand why. In other words, when there's unprecedented change and particularly unprecedented threats, it's quite normal to feel unsettled, to feel tense, to feel threatened. And when we feel threatened, we feel ungrounded. Our system contracts and we lose touch with our body, we lose touch with the earth, and we lose touch with our deepest ground. So first, I would just normalize that. It's like, I understand, and there's good reason for that. Then the second step would be like, okay, well, how can I resource myself? What is it that I know helps me feel more grounded and more at ease? And maybe I connect with friends, maybe I spend time in nature. Maybe I get back to that sitting practice that I used to have, or maybe I, deepen in that. Maybe I just sit here and actually let my attention drop down, like noticing, okay, a lot of attention is up here in the forehead. What if I were to relax and let it drop into my heart? And what if I were to relax further and let it drop down all the way into the pelvic bowl, the legs, and the earth? What if I just let myself feel held in this moment by gravity, by earth, and perhaps by something deeper? And what if I keep opening to that? So there are many levels to resource ourselves, many ways, and some of them we may not yet have discovered, and some of them we actually know quite well. We know what ungrounds us. We know what grounds us. It's like too much media, too much information. I mean, we're just flooded with it now. It's like, okay, I'll look at the headlines, but I kind of know what the content is. I don't need to go into it again. It's like, that's re-traumatizing. I do that. I keep informed. I read, I regularly read the New York Times and other kind of online media, but I also kind of keep a certain diet. It's like, I'll take half an hour and do that. And then I'll take my walk, So I'll titrate the news, and particularly news that I'm familiar with. I kind of know the story. So I don't overemphasize the negative. And in terms of responding then creatively, it's, I think, always good to find a particular maybe group that we affiliate with, that we feel an accord with, and connect with them in a way to feel support, and also work towards something we truly believe in. So it's not just about individual resourcing, but it's also about connecting and supporting movements that we feel are life-giving or life-protecting. And that gives us a sense of purpose and engagement as well. Now, one of the things, too, is that for those of us who maybe are inclined to be social activists, we know it's very easy to burn out, because social activism is very stressful. It often takes a long time for positive changes to happen, and it's very discouraging when you see regression, as we're seeing on a massive scale now, positive changes being erased overnight. So that principle of if we are an activist, I think it's very important to have that kind of resourcing, either in community and or within ourselves in terms of our spiritual depths, and to again and again refresh ourselves, to release, let go, and start anew in terms of facing whatever the challenge may be.
I love this advice. So helpful. Beginning with understanding and normalization, moving on to resourcing oneself, reaching out to friends, dropping into the body, into the heart, into the ground, going on a little information diet, because it is so easy to be flooded. And that's all the time we have for today. So I have to finish by asking the question I ask all of my guests, which is, what do you wish everyone knew about love?
That love is an essential quality of our true nature, that it is always here in the depths of our heart, awaiting our conscious recognition. The more we attune with it consciously, the more it radiates out spontaneously. And the more we live our life from the heart, the well-grounded heart, the happier we are, and the more of service to the greater life we are as well.
Beautiful. So thank you so much, John Prendergast, for coming onto the show. For our listeners that want to learn more about you, where can they find you?
They can go to my website, www.listeningfromsilence, all one word, .com, or they can just Google my name, John Prendergast, PhD.
Well, again, it's so wonderful to reconnect with you over some years in time, and to hear this continuing deepening and discovery and this path that you have been on. And not only do I feel very grounded after our conversation, but also very inspired. So thank you so much, John.
Beautiful. Lovely to be with you, Zach.
And thank you, listeners, so much for listening. I hope you remember all of the valuable lessons that Dr. Prendergast shared with us today, including: when our heart opens, we feel an innate and intrinsic wholeness or completeness in ourself and everyone else. This is the culmination of the spiritual quest. In order to stabilize such an awakening, we must get in touch with our deepest ground. The deepest ground is a bundle of tension, a dense area of conditioning in the belly that we must learn to relax. This release of contraction happens spontaneously when there is a seeing through of what is not true. So for that, we need self-honesty and vulnerability, coupled with a love of truth. I hope you remember that love is an essential quality of our true nature. And remember, you are perfect just the way you are. You are lovable, loving, and loved.
Thanks again for listening to the Learn to Love podcast. To learn more about the show and your host, head over to zachbeach.com or theheartcenter.com. You can also follow Zach on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.